The 43rd Discourse. How little you have in you of the affirmation of divine unity. How little readiness to accept the will of Allah, exalted is He. There is no illness except that which Allah has willed, so it is pointless to quarrel and wrangle with Him. You have so often been guilty of attributing partners to Allah, exalted is He, through your idolatrous worship of the material means and of people who are mere creatures like yourselves. You have chosen to regard this person and that person as lords, to the exclusion of Allah, almighty and glorious is He. You treat them as if they could be the source of harm and benefit, as if they had the power to give and to withhold. You must not go on behaving like this. You must turn again to your Lord, almighty and glorious is He. You must dedicate your hearts entirely to Him. You must turn to Him in humble entreaty and beg Him to supply you with everything you need. You must apply to Him for all your urgent requirements. You have no other place to turn. You have no other door by which to enter. All other doors have been locked shut. You must spend time alone with Him in lonely places. You must talk to Him and speak to Him directly with the tongues of your faith. The following practice is one that should be adopted by each and every one amongst you, as soon as the other members of your family have all gone to sleep, and the sounds and voices of your fellow creatures have fallen silent. You should cleanse yourself by performing the ritual ablution, then lower your forehead to the ground. While you are in that humble posture, you should repent, beg pardon, confess your sins, implore your Lord to grant His gracious favor, and ask Him to supply your needs. You should also complain to Him about any problems that are causing a feeling of tightness in your breast. He is your Lord, almighty and glorious is He, not any other, and He is your God, not any other. Woe unto you! You must not run away on account of the arrows of His afflictions. He has treated all your predecessors in the same way, exposing them to pain and suffering, making them experience difficulty and hardship as well as ease and comfort, so that they might acknowledge Him and be grateful to Him, so that they might learn to be patient with Him and entrust themselves to His care. Punishments are for the common folk, while acts of atonement are for the truly devout believers, and spiritual degrees are for the righteous of true conviction. The triumphant champions of truth, the Prophet, Allah bless him and give him peace, has told us, of all people, we prophets are the ones most sorely afflicted. Then those who resemble us most closely, and so on down the scale. When the true believer is afflicted, he bears his affliction with patience. He keeps it well hidden from his fellow creatures and does not complain to them. This is why the Prophet, Allah bless him and give him peace, has told us, the believer wears his cheerfulness on his face, while his sadness stays inside his heart. That is to say, he greets other people with a cheerful expression so that they will not notice what is in his heart. True believers hide the treasures of their inner beings. They act in accordance with the natural disposition of their hearts. Sadness is the natural disposition of our hearts, while fear is the natural disposition of our lower selves. Sadness is a cloud that showers the heart with drops of wisdom and secret knowledge. Why will you not be patient in bearing sadness and broken-heartedness, when Allah, almighty and glorious is He, has said in one of His utterances, I am with those whose hearts are broken on my account. Whenever their hearts are broken because of remoteness, along comes the mender of nearness to mend them. Whenever they are alienated from their fellow creatures, along comes intimate friendship with Allah, almighty and glorious is He, to put them at their ease. Whenever they become estranged from their fellow creatures, they discover intimate friendship in the nearness of Allah, almighty and glorious is He. Whenever their sadness lasts for a long time in this world, their happiness is of long duration in the hereafter. The Prophet, Allah bless him and give him peace, would often experience prolonged bouts of sadness, and he was always given to contemplation. He would seem to be listening carefully, as if to an invisible speaker who was talking to him, or to someone calling out to him from the unseen. His executors, his representatives, his deputies and his heirs are likewise notable for the long duration of their sadness and the constancy of their contemplation. How could they fail to follow the example he set by his actions, when they are standing in his stead, feeding people with his food and quenching their thirst with his drink, using his horses for transport, and wielding his swords and his spears in battle? The people have inherited the situation of the prophets, may the blessings and peace of Allah be upon them all, and their position in the scheme of things, though not their personal names and titles, nor the special attributes and peculiar virtues with which they were endowed. The saints and spiritual deputies are limited to a certain number, which they never exceed and of which they never fall short. It may therefore happen that one of them begins to play his role at a very early age, while in the case of another, his true role does not become apparent until the latter part of his life. Transformations are brought about through the presence of such an individual, for he is the friend of Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, in the knowledge of Allah, Almighty and glorious is He. Impeccable virtue is not a prerequisite for spiritual deputyship and sainthood. Impeccable virtue is one of the special attributes of the prophets, may the blessings and peace of Allah be upon them all, and it has not survived beyond their time. According to the classical Arabic lexicographers, Ismatut el-Anbiya signifies Allah's preservation of the prophets, first by the peculiar endowment of them with essential purity of constitution, then, by the conferring of large and highly esteemed excellences, then, by aid against opponents, and rendering their feet firm, then, by sending down upon them tranquility and the preservation of their hearts, an adaptation to that which is right. According to traditional report, the Prophet, Allah bless him and give him peace, once said, whenever one of the friends of Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, is guilty of disobedience, the angels laugh, as they say to one another, just look at that friend of Allah. See how he is committing a sinful act of disobedience. They do not express astonishment at his sinful disobedience, his unbelief, his remoteness and his hypocrisy, for they know full well that after a few days he will become a beloved friend, one who is drawn near, honored and purified, an intercessor, a guide, and a heir. O hypocrite, it is no business of yours to be listening to this talk. Get out of here. You are the enemy of Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, and the enemy of His messengers, His prophets and His saints, may the blessings and peace of Allah be upon them all. Were it not for the sense of shame that I feel in the presence of Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, I would come down and grab you by the scruff of your neck, and then I would throw you out of here. Everything that you are involved in is stupid fantasy. O my people! You must put what you learn into practice, and you must do so with real sincerity. You must not be vain and conceited. You must not resent the fact that credit is due to your Lord, Almighty and glorious is He, for deeds which He has helped you to perform. The conceited person is an ignorant person. The person who bears a grudge is an ignorant person. The person who adopts an attitude of arrogant pride toward his fellow creatures is an ignorant person. Modest humility is from the All-Merciful, while arrogant pride is from the devil. The first to adopt an attitude of arrogant pride was Iblis, so he was cursed, abominated, and treated as an outcast. If it were not the case that self-abasement and modest humility constitute a high spiritual degree, Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, would not have attributed such qualities to those whom He loves and who love Him. As He has told us in His own words, exalted is He, O you who have believed, if one of you becomes a renegade from his religion, Allah will surely bring a people whom He loves, and who love Him, humble toward the believers, disdainful toward the unbelievers. 554. The true believers are humble in their attitude and behavior toward their fellow believers, while they treat the unbelievers with disdain. Their humility toward their fellow believers is an aspect of religious worship. Far from adopting an attitude of arrogant pride toward his fellow creatures, the believer is modest and humble in his dealings with them. He conceals his true status by behaving with such modesty and humility. He is actually a close confidant of the king in his palace, so when he goes out and about, the king accompanies him in the guise of an attendant servant, so that none of his friends will be able to recognize him. Even the vizier cannot get away with treating him in a haughty manner, for he has only to dismiss him by saying with a smile, "The king is with me." Indeed, he can grin right in his face. As he goes about his business, he gives the impression that the person with him is just one of his attendant servants, and he takes great care to preserve his disguise and keep his true identity from being revealed. You do not recognize the true condition of the people of the Lord, and you do not acknowledge the truth of what they have to say. Your involvement with worldly creatures is an obstacle that prevents you from getting to know them. Your love of prestige in this world, and the ambitious pursuit of political leadership, these are obstacles that prevent you from getting to know them. If you had been genuinely interested in trying to find them, you would have recognized them by now, and you would have derived complete satisfaction from what they had to tell you. Woe unto you! You do not spend any time in the company of people who put their knowledge into practice. You are not like those who drink what they have to offer, here in my presence, so you do not experience the effect of that kind of wine. We know many who profess to be learned scholars, and yet, as far as actual practice is concerned, not one of them is any better than a common illiterate. Any scholar who fails to put his knowledge into practice deserves to be regarded as a common illiterate, even if he happens to have memorized all the subjects in the curriculum. This applies to anyone who has no real awareness of Allah, Almighty and glorious is He. It applies to anyone who does not fear Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, and does not pin all his hopes on Him. It applies to anyone who is not truly devoted to Him, in both his private and his public life. The shape of your spiritual states is as clearly visible to me as that sun up there in the sky. You are not following the path of right guidance. You are callow youths, interested only in trying to satisfy your carnal appetites. You are the slaves of your fellow creatures. You are slaves to their giving and their withholding, slaves to their praise and their blame. Do not try to deceive me. There is no longer any room for doubt in my mind. The outside of the door and the inside of the door are one and the same from my point of view. Whatever is in your hearts, the outline of it can be seen on your faces, and its symptoms are there to be read. Glory be to the one who has made me take my place here in front of you, and has set me the trying task of lecturing to you. I am quite detached from all of you, as I am detached from my own lower self and my allotted portions of worldly goods. Fortunately for me, I am not interested in eating and drinking, dressing up, indulging in sexual activity, or putting on a show. Fortunately for me, I have been able to stand aside from you, and to learn what I needed to know through direct indication, rather than verbal communication. I feel disgust at the sight of hypocrites, rebellious sinners, and those who attribute partners to Allah, but I am not allowed to avoid them. They are sick people, and I have been charged with the task of initiating a course of treatment to cure their sickness. The simple believer, being a novice in faith, is quite incapable of paying considerate attention to any of these types, and he cannot tolerate them for a single instant. If he happens to catch sight of a hypocrite, or a rebellious sinner, or someone who is guilty of attributing partners to Allah, he will fly into a rage. He would even kill the offender, if it were in his power to do so. We have in fact heard of such a person, may the mercy of Allah be upon him, who would become angry if he caught so much as a glimpse of an unbeliever, and who would fall to the ground in a fit of rage if he had to go on looking at him for any length of time. This violent reaction of his was due to the intensity of his zeal for Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, and his extreme reluctance to accept the very idea that any servant of his might somehow fail to believe in him. There can be no doubt that this particular believer was a novice, because the earliest stage of faith is characterized by weakness, and the final stage by strength. A certain righteous man, may the mercy of Allah the Exalted be upon him, is reported as having said, "Only a person of mature spiritual experience is qualified to laugh in the face of the hypocrite. He must be a man of many devices and highly refined skills, who possesses the necessary expertise to act as a physician, so he can smile in the hypocrite's face as he tells him, 'Look, I have the priceless medicine to cure you.' He must speak to him pleasantly, in order to win his confidence, and he must engage his attention until he feels at ease in his company. Then, when he is in a position to influence him sufficiently, he can proceed to treat his sickness. He will do this by introducing him to Islam and to faith, citing the traditional sources as he explains their true significance. He will introduce him to the words of his Lord, Almighty and glorious is He, gently persuading him to become reconciled with Him. Thus, as the days go by, his unbelief will gradually melt away, as will his hypocrisy and his sinful disobedience. The sickness of his heart will fade away, and he will become a reformed character. Both his external personality and his inner nature will steadily improve, without any argument or quarreling, without any prodding or beating. Jesus, the son of Mary, and John the Baptist, blessings and peace be upon them both, were traveling together in the desert. When the darkness of night spread its shroud upon them, John went to the village of the believers, while Jesus made his way to the village of the sinners. Because of the strength of his spiritual state, Jesus was moved to admonish and warn those transgressors, to take them by the hand and lead them to the door of their Lord, Almighty and glorious is He. Whereas John wished to pray and fast among the believers, Jesus wished to summon people to the Lord of truth, Almighty and glorious is He. John the Baptist is mentioned several times in the Quran, where he is called Yahya ibn Zachariah. Surah 19 opens with an account of his birth, which is also referred to in 21 hours 89 minutes in 334. He is said to have been sent with glad tidings to confirm the word from Allah, a chief and a chaste one and a prophet from the righteous. In 6 hours 85 minutes, Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, has said, and we guided Zachariah, and Yahya, and Jesus, and Elias, all righteous ones. In the case of someone who is spiritually aware, remembrance and worshipful service of the Lord are duly performed by summoning his fellow creatures to Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, so his relationship with Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, is always on this basis. The simple Muslim is quite straightforward, and the simple believer is equally straightforward. When someone is spiritually aware, however, his behavior becomes erratic, and when someone really knows Allah, Almighty and glorious is He is awestruck and dumbfounded. Woe unto you! You have yet to experience the real meaning of Islam, so how can you put yourself on this lofty pedestal, teaching and imparting knowledge to your fellow creatures? You had better get down from there at once, otherwise I shall knock you down so that you land right on your head. Religions are of various kinds. Faith draws a distinction between the true and the false. It dismisses every hypocrite from his position of authority, brings him down out of his pulpit, and makes him hold his tongue instead of lecturing to the people. O all you creatures, I am quite independent of you, since all my needs are met by Allah, Almighty and glorious is He. Wealth is at my disposal, even though I do not possess a single atom of this world. If one of my fellow creatures happens to give me a gift or grant me a favor, I accept that thing from the hand of Allah, Almighty and glorious is He. I regard the person's claim to fame as silly nonsense, and I give thanks to my Lord, Almighty and glorious is He, after He has bestowed His favor upon me. Whenever I give something to someone, I acknowledge the helpful intervention of Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, recognizing how He has caused His gift to be conveyed by my hand. Thus I acknowledge the fact that Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, is the giver, not I. He gives according to the quality of your aspiration, and according to the quality of your aspiration He withholds His gifts. This is why the Prophet, Allah bless him and give him peace, has told us, Allah loves noble things, and He hates things that are shoddy. O my people, do not neglect your children and your wives. You must instruct them in the worshipful service of Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, in how to behave correctly in His company, and in readiness to accept His will. From the point of view of your hearts, you should not be at all concerned about your means of livelihood. What you ought to be concerned about is whether you are directing your energies toward the fulfillment of your true responsibilities. It seems to me that most of you have been neglecting the education of your children, while concerning yourselves with their daily bread. Take the opposite approach, and you will be right on target. The Prophet, Allah bless him and give him peace, is reported as having said, each one of you is a shepherd, responsible for his flock. The father will be held responsible for his children and his wife, and his children and his wife will be held responsible in their turn. Every master will be held responsible for his slave, and every slave for his master. The teacher will be held responsible for his young students, the chief for the people of his village, and the king for the people of his kingdom. The commander of the believers, who is the shepherd of all the people, will be held responsible for his flock. No one among you is exempt. Every single one of you will be held responsible as a separate individual. You must strive hard to ensure that you are not guilty of any injustice. You must strive hard to ensure that all rights are accorded to those who are entitled to them. You must be generous in sharing your goods with one another. You must be kind and compassionate in your treatment of one another. You must not curse one another. You must not try to control one another by force. You must settle your mutual accounts, and work hard in cooperation. Do not expose one another's faults. You must be tolerant of one another where mistakes and failings are concerned. You must leave people under the protection of Allah, Almighty and glorious is He. You must command what is right and proper, and forbid what is wrong and unfair, but you must do so without prying and spying. You must express disapproval of flagrant misconduct, but it is not your business to probe into what is kept hidden. Overlook the faults of others, and Allah, Almighty and glorious is He, may overlook your own faults. The Prophet, Allah bless him and give him peace, used to love it when people were ready to forgive their fellow creatures, and he hated the prosecution of misdemeanors. This is why he said, Allah bless him and give him peace, suspend the enforcement of the penalties in cases where there are dubious circumstances. This is one of the most fundamental principles of Islamic jurisprudence. In another hadith, the Prophet, Allah bless him and give him peace, went so far as to say, suspend the enforcement of the prescribed penalties whenever you possibly can. He also said to Ali ibn Abi Talib, may Allah be well pleased with him, and may he ennoble his countenance, O Ali, be like this. Look, and he pointed to the sun. The active practice of goodness consists in giving more than you owe, and accepting less than what is due to you. If you are capable of going even further than this, you should ideally waive the whole of the debt that is owed to you, and give the debtor some extra credit into the bargain. Strength will thereby accrue to your faith, your conviction, and your confidence in your Lord. Almighty and glorious is He. When you sell by weight, you should tilt the balance in favor of your customer, for then Allah may tilt the balance in your favor on the day of resurrection. O you who handle the scales, be sure to give an extra measure, for then you may receive an extra measure when Allah gives you something. According to a traditional report, the Prophet, Allah bless him and give him peace, once borrowed some pieces of silver from a man, and then, when it was time to settle the debt, he said to the person who was weighing his repayment, weigh the amount due, and add some extra weight. If one of you ever borrows something from another person, he should give back more than he has received, voluntarily increasing his repayment by an amount that is over and above whatever was stipulated in the original loan. O my people, you must buy from Allah the nearness of Allah. Almighty and glorious is He. Buy Allah from Allah. As for your allotted portions of worldly goods, they have been marked with their dates of delivery. They can neither increase nor diminish. It makes no difference whether you go looking for them or do not bother to look for them, whether you serve your Lord or disobey Him, whether you behave well or badly. There can be no question of speeding up the delivery of allotments assigned to a later date, nor of postponing those that are due to come early. What is required of you is that you move away from the realm of creation as far as your hearts are concerned, and that you stand fast in the company of the Creator on the feet of your innermost beings. Allah is the all-providing one, while everyone else is provided for. He is the independently wealthy one, while everyone else is dependent on what He provides. He is the all-capable one, while everyone else is feeble and incompetent. He is the one who sets things in motion and the one who causes things to be still. He is the sovereign who exercises absolute dominion, the master who compels obedience. All creatures are instruments subject to His control. He has supplied everything with a means of subsistence. You must become oblivious of your fellow creatures, then of the material means and all the things of this world, as far as your hearts are concerned, and as far as your private lives, your spiritual contents and your innermost beings are concerned. You must rid your hearts of everything apart from Him. You must take precautions now, in case He should look into your hearts while they still contain the desire for something other than Him, the wish for something other than Him. You must submit to His will and resign yourselves sincerely to submissive obedience. You must affirm the divine unity and be single in your devotion. You must be ready to accept the decree of destiny and be completely satisfied with the accomplished fact. You must pay careful heed to your Lord. Almighty and glorious is He, while turning a deaf ear to His creatures. You must take no notice of your fellow creatures and try to be independent of them. The hour of courage is an hour of patience. You must repent, each and every one of you. You must repent wholeheartedly to the one who holds the hour in his hand. This was a favorite saying of Shaikh Abd al-Qadir al-Jilani, may Allah be well pleased with him, judging by its frequent occurrence in his talks. You must remember death and that which lies beyond it. The Prophet, Allah bless him and give him peace, used to say, remember often the wrecker of delights, for the less it is remembered, the more devastating it becomes, and the more it is remembered, the less dreadful it comes to be. The remembrance of death is a remedy for the sickness of our lower selves, and a strong dose of it has a beneficial effect upon our hearts. Forgetfulness of death results in the hardening of the heart, and causes it to have a lazy attitude to worshipful obedience. If a person is guilty of paying too much attention to his fellow creatures, and of regarding them as the source of harm and benefit, he is liable to be seduced into unbelief, led astray into wicked ways, and barred from the vision of his Lord, Almighty and glorious is He. To place reliance on a human being is to diminish faith and extinguish the light of conviction. It prevents the heart from experiencing the vision of the Lord, Almighty and glorious is He. It invites His displeasure, causes one to fall from His grace, and bars the door to His nearness. How unfortunate for you! What if you should die while you are in the state you are in right now, while your hearts are devoid of faith and conviction, of the affirmation of divine unity, of sincere devotion, and of any real awareness of your Lord, Almighty and glorious is He? Woe unto you! There seems to be no limit to your insolence. You have made it your perverse habit to offer resistance to your Lord, Almighty and glorious is He, every night and every day of your lives. No one who insists on being so stubborn and intractable will ever feel the breath of nearness, and not a single atom of value will ever fall into such a person's hand. You must give up this obstinate perversity, O you whose hearts are so impoverished, O you who have turned your backs on faith. O Allah, join us closely together with all that you love, keep us far apart from all that you hate, and give us in this world good, and good in the hereafter, and guard us against the torment of the fire.